Lord of Mysteries. My Identities echoes across time. Chapter 21 to 30. Good night, Melissa, Benson. Good night, Klein. At Unit 2 Daffodil Street, after watching the play, The Count's Return, the Moretti family exchanged goodnights and went to their rooms to rest. The Emperor really didn't leave any room for later transmigrators. Closing the door and sitting on the soft mattress, Klein recalled the content of the play he had just watched and couldn't help but mentally grumble about Russell, who left no path for future transmigrators. But just a few seconds after he sat down, Klein suddenly heard a tapping sound at the window. Surprised, he looked towards the window and saw a figure floating outside. Through the glass, Klein could clearly see that it was a gentleman with bronze skin, gentle features, and eyes that seemed to carry an indescribable sense of age and experience. His history teacher, the mysterious and enigmatic Isaac Eggers, who seemed to be living through a series of restarts in life, constantly seeking his lost memories. Mr. Isaac. Klein hurriedly got up and ran to the window, opening it to let Isaac Eggers in. Isaac first gave him a once-over from head to toe before speaking warmly. I hope I didn't disturb you. Sorry, I was 10 minutes late and couldn't assist you. Isaac apologized sincerely, referring to his delay in responding to the plea for help during the recent Evil God's Offspring incident. Before charging out to confront Megos, Klein had written to Isaac for help, but since Isaac was in Backland at the time, by the time he received the letter and returned, the battle was over. Fortunately, the outcome of the battle was good. Otherwise, Isaac would only have been able to mourn Klein at his grave. No, Klein shook his head quickly. Mr. Isaac, it's already very good of you to be willing to help. Everything was in Zangwill's fault. Klein certainly wouldn't blame Mr. Isaac for arriving late. He wasn't someone who was ungrateful or didn't recognize kindness. On the contrary, if Mr. Isaac hadn't arrived suddenly, Klein had been about to write him a letter with good news. I was just about to write to you, Mr. Isaac. Ince Zangwill has been killed, and your child's death has finally been avenged. I also found a characteristic of the death pathway on him, which might be the skull of your child. Klein briefly recounted the recent events, omitting the parts about his transmigration. Isaac listened quietly and finally sighed imperceptibly before softly asking, can you help me retrieve the skull? I can exchange something else for it. Mr. Isaac really loves his child. Hearing the depth of emotion in that request, Klein couldn't help but feel a twinge of sorrow and nodded firmly. I'll try my best to see if I can exchange my merits for it, but I can't guarantee the result. Though requesting half a skull might raise suspicion, Klein, who had already shown the flaring sun charm and had mysterious ties with an unknown angel, wasn't too concerned about a little suspicion at this point. After all, Klein dared to do this partly because he knew the hero halo surrounding him would likely keep him safe despite some out-of-the-box actions. And Mr. Isaac had helped him so much, Klein was willing to bear this small cost for him. Klein also trusted Isaac's mystery and generosity to provide him with satisfactory compensation. On the other hand, Klein had noticed from the attitude of the Evernight Church's higher-ups during today's inquiry that they were more tolerant than he had initially thought. As long as they didn't commit betrayal, having some personal secrets didn't seem to matter much to the high-ranking members of the church. Thank you, Isaac expressed his sincere gratitude. You've helped me a lot. It's something I should do, Klein replied, then hesitated as he looked at Isaac, before finally asking, Mr. Isaac, do you know that angel? No, I've never encountered such a being, but it might also be something I haven't remembered yet, Isaac Eggers reflected for a few seconds before shaking his head. But based on your description, it seems that he bears you no malice. Ads by PubFuture. Disappointed that Mr. Isaac didn't know Lynn either, Klein nodded, having prepared himself for this outcome. I think so too. Even though Klein didn't know Lynn's ultimate goal, he hadn't felt any malice from him. Klein was acutely aware that if someone of Lynn's sequence truly intended to harm him, as a mere Sequence 8, he would be utterly powerless to resist. Of course, it's possible that he has a larger agenda, so I can't completely let my guard down. At the very least, I must maintain a basic level of vigilance. Klein cautioned himself internally, just as Isaac Eggers suddenly said, I'll be resigning from my current job soon to focus on searching for my past memories. My first stop will be Backland. I'll keep an eye out for the angel you described. Thank you, Mr. Azek, Klein said sincerely. Azek smiled gently and replied, as you said earlier, it's something I should do. Hearing this, Klein paused, and then the two of them exchanged a look and laughed simultaneously. It's late. You should rest. You can write to me if anything comes up. With that, Azek Eggers bid farewell and left. Klein closed the window, sat at his desk, and finally had time to review the day's events. Though it ended well, there was no doubt that without the intervention of that fellow transmigrator, today could have been the end of the Tingen Nighthawks team. And I, the captain, and Leonard might have been killed by Zangwill, even if we managed to handle Megos and the evil god's offspring. Klein felt a sense of helplessness. Despite having the gray fog as a cheat and having eliminated the interference from 008, he still couldn't prevent Zangwill's schemes, as if fate was playing a joke on him, providing hints but leaving him helpless to change his destiny. But what could Klein do except accept the outcome with a smile? Perhaps this was the clown's predicament. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Klein suddenly froze. At that moment, he finally had an epiphany about the true meaning of clown. It was the understanding that, even though one can slightly foresee destiny, they still feel helpless about it, and thus cover all their sorrow, pain, confusion, and frustration with a smiling face. Simultaneously, Klein clearly felt the digestion of the clown potion, which indicated that his understanding of the clown was correct. So that's how it is. Klein suddenly felt a mix of emotions. He had thought so much about the true meaning of the clown potion's digestion but didn't expect to comprehend it in such a situation. But in the end, Klein just showed a bright smile. No matter what, comprehending the true meaning of clown was beneficial for him. This meant he could digest the clown potion faster, advance to a higher sequence, and gain more power to protect himself in this dangerous world. It also brought him closer to the truth. What is the secret behind my transmigration? Is that fellow transmigrator lying to me, or does he truly know something? Klein's mind was filled with Lynn's cryptic words. He looked up at the crimson moon in the sky and couldn't help but recall the silver moon of his homeland. Klein suddenly felt a pang of homesickness. He missed his parents, his best friends, the computers, cola, and chicken wings on Earth. He missed those things that he had taken for granted but could no longer see. Can I ever go back home? Klein silently asked himself, his expression filled with confusion and a bit of fear, but the next second, it became firm. I will definitely go back home. Even if he felt guilty towards Benson and Melissa, Klein couldn't lie to his heart, nor could he stop missing his family on Earth. Let me go to the fog and perform a divination, see if I can get any clues. Klein sighed and then reversed his steps, arriving above the gray fog. However, whether it was because it involved high-sequence beyonders or due to a lack of information, this time the divination yielded no results. Klein didn't feel too disappointed. Sensing the dual fatigue of his body and mind, he decided to have a good rest. The next morning, when the refreshed Klein arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company, he hadn't even had a chance to inquire about Azek's child's skull before he saw a special visitor. It was a man wearing a black trench coat and a white shirt, appearing to be in his 30s. His hair was cut short, a common golden brown color, and his eyes were dark green. The collar of his shirt and trench coat were turned up high, hiding his chin in shadows. He was Krestet Sesimir, the Sword of the Goddess, one of the 9 senior deacons of the Nighthawks. In the Evernight Church, the 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons were considered the usual top echelon of the church. Among them were not only high-sequence powerhouses but also individuals whose status was equal. They only followed the oracles of the Evernight Goddess and were accountable only to the pontiff. Krestet Sesimir's presence here was because he brought a divine message from the Evernight Goddess. Has the goddess issued a divine message? Ads by PubFuture. While Klein could remain calm due to his lack of deep reverence and faith in the deity, Leonard beside him was obviously shocked. The poet looked as if he might jump up in surprise, completely abandoning his usual lazy demeanor. Yes, the goddess has issued a divine message. Krestet Sesimir said solemnly, looking at Klein and Leonard with a serious expression, his voice low. Klein, Leonard, according to the goddess's will, you two will be transferred to Backland, becoming members of the Nighthawks team there. You will also carry out a secret mission to find the angel, Batman. The final, Batman, was naturally pronounced in English by Krestet Sesimir. However, as someone who had never encountered the English language before, his accent was as expected. Ahem. Klein, who had been tense, almost laughed out loud at the phrase, Batman. But as clown, he managed to control his expression and, along with Leonard, saluted and said respectfully, "Praise the goddess, your will is my command. Praise the goddess." Krestet Sesimir also drew a crimson moon on his chest and then said, "You have 3 days to prepare before leaving. Since your transfer is mainly to carry out a secret mission, the church will cover your expenses after you arrive in Backland. The church means that this matter should not be made public. Although your actions will be supported in secret, you won't openly seek that individual." Krestet Sesimir continued, "My personal suggestion is that after you arrive in Backland, it's best to operate under a false identity. Blending in with the wild Beyonder circles will help you gather information better. You know, those hidden wild Beyonders are always wary of official members. You can use the church's channels for this. We have a department that provides identity documents for colleagues on secret missions. These identities, though fake, are officially recognized. The church has informants planted in many underground gatherings in Backland. After you arrive, you can seek information from colleagues in charge of that aspect." Though phrased as a personal suggestion, hearing Sesimir's well-arranged plan, Klein and Leonard exchanged glances. Even the slower Leonard realized that using false identities to contact wild Beyonders and search for the angel was likely the higher-ups' intent, just not openly stated. This was natural. Since it was a secret mission, it wouldn't make sense to operate openly under an official identity. In fact, all major churches had members executing secret missions under various aliases. For instance, Alger was such a person. Although the major forces were well aware of his identity as a member of the Church of the Storms, to ordinary Beyonders, he was just the captain of the Blue Avenger, an ordinary pirate. Klein and Leonard naturally had no objections and nodded, "Understood, we will comply." End of chapter. Seeing Klein and Leonard both so understanding, Krestet Sesimir nodded approvingly. He then exchanged a few words with them before suddenly saying, "Leonard, step out for a moment. I need to talk to Klein alone." Leonard was taken aback for a moment, then quickly stood up and said, "All right, I'll go out now." After Leonard left, Krestet Sesimir took out a box from his pocket and handed it to Klein. Klein quickly took the box and, upon opening it, was stunned because inside the box was half of Mr. Azek's child's skull. Klein's pupils dilated slightly at this moment, but as a clown, he managed to keep his composure. He looked at Krestet Sesimir with confusion and asked, "Isn't this the one we found on Mr. Zangwill?" "Yes, from now on, it belongs to you," Krestet Sesimir said seriously. Klein's mind was in turmoil at this moment. He raised his head and tentatively asked, "Why are you giving it to me?" This question wasn't surprising, as anyone in this situation would be curious. "I'm not sure of the reason. It's the will of the Evernight goddess," Krestet Sesimir said solemnly. Then he smiled gently and added, "But I believe the goddess has her reasons. Since she has made this arrangement, you will surely need this thing in the future. Klein, the goddess values you greatly. Strive for promotion. Maybe one day, we can fight side by side," Krestet Sesimir said encouragingly. He truly felt that the goddess valued Klein greatly, and he even suspected that Klein might become the goddess's blessed in the future. "If that day comes, I will be very honored," Klein said, now calm. He smiled and echoed Krestet Sesimir's words with a hint of longing in his tone. After Krestet Sesimir finished explaining things and left the meeting room, Klein breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at the box in his hand with curiosity and confusion. While he could accept being tasked with finding an angelic compatriot after learning about it with Leonard, now knowing that the Evernight goddess specifically named him to return Mr. Azek's child's skull made him reconsider everything. Does the goddess know Mr. Azek? Could Mr. Azek's amnesia be related to the goddess? No, Since the goddess actively asked me to return the skull to Mr. Azek, it means she probably doesn't have any ill intentions towards him. Klein pondered. But when did the goddess know that I knew Mr. Azek? Has she been watching Mr. Azek all this time? Or, Klein pursed his lips, thinking of another possibility. She has been watching me all along. Although it was a secret mission, apart from keeping the mission itself confidential, other members of the Tingen's Nighthawks naturally were informed about Klein and Leonard's upcoming transfer to Backland. Although everyone felt reluctant, they were also happy for Klein and Leonard. In their eyes, being transferred from a small place like Tingen to a big city like Backland was undoubtedly a sign of being valued. So, while Klein and Leonard hadn't left yet, the Nighthawks even held a farewell party on the same day to celebrate their promotion. Although Klein's mood was somewhat complicated, he still felt touched by everyone's blessings. After the farewell party ended and he bid farewell to everyone, Klein returned home with the box containing Mr. Azek's child's skull. Only then did he have time to write a letter to Mr. Azek. The content of the letter was simple, just informing Mr. Azek that he had obtained the skull and incidentally informing him that Klein himself was also going to Backland. As for the skull itself, of course, it wasn't sent with the letter. After all, if such a significant thing was lost in the spirit world, Klein would have nowhere to cry. Ads by PubFuture. As for the part about the Evernight goddess's message, Klein also did not mention it in the letter. This part was too important, and to avoid accidents, Klein planned to inform Mr. Azek in person and ask for his opinion. I wonder when Mr. Azek will come. Klein handed the written letter to the bone messenger and watched as it disappeared. At the same time, he recalled the events of the day. Although his rationality leaned towards the idea that the Evernight goddess knew Mr. Azek and thus knew that she knew him, Klein couldn't help but consider another possibility. If the Evernight goddess really had been watching him, the only thing Klein could think of that was worth being watched was his identity as a transmigrator and the gray fog associated with his traversal. Combined with what the angel fellow said, Klein suddenly felt as if he was standing in the middle of an abyss. Maybe there really is some significant secret to my traversal, related to this world, or even to the gods. Klein pursed his lips. If that's the case, what can I do? Klein didn't know. After all, compared to a god or an angel, he was just a low-ranking Beander. Klein didn't know what they wanted to do, whether they were as benevolent as they appeared, or what kind of ending he would face. The only thing Klein could think of was one word. Advance. Advancing to a higher rank, becoming stronger, so he could grasp more initiative in this unknown whirlpool, rather than passively being engulfed. As a person outside the church system, Lynn naturally didn't know about the Evernight goddess's message. But as someone who deliberately paid attention to Klein's movements, Lynn almost immediately noticed Klein preparing to travel. So, the Evernight goddess has really reacted, and she wants to transfer Klein to Backland. Lynn rubbed his chin, not surprised by this. Yeah, maybe she'll even arrange for Klein to find me. For the Evernight goddess, it's impossible for her to pretend not to know about me, a sudden angel-level Beander, Lynn mused. End of this chapter. But what does your search for the angel, Batman, have to do with me, a weak, pitiful, and helpless Sequence 9? Lynn feigned innocence, spreading his hands while various thoughts continuously emerged in his mind. At this point in time, if Klein went to Backland, given the Sephiroth's attraction to the three pathways at play, he's very likely to get involved in the Tirani von Helmasuen's manuscript incident. And my public identity has already been implicated in the manuscript incident by the Evernight Church. They must be looking for me. So, should I take this opportunity to meet Klein? After all, I've come all this way. If I transmigrate to Lord of Mysteries but don't meet Klein, it feels like something is missing. As for the previous encounter, Lynn didn't consider it a proper meeting. At best, he just tricked Klein for a meal. To really get to know him, they would have to become friends. Moreover, directly getting to know Klein might allow me to join the Tarot Club through him, just like Emlyn White did, Lynn mused, stroking his chin. It seemed quite feasible. After all, becoming friends with someone of Klein's character wouldn't be a loss. Lynn was undoubtedly a man of action. So, after deciding to crash into Klein using the Tyranny von Helmasuen's manuscript incident. Lynn bought a ticket back to Backland overnight to prepare. Lynn first went to check on Zeril Victor Lee and found that the unlucky spy had already been killed. Lynn discovered Zeril's mangled corpse in the sewer through divination. The time of death coincided with Lynn Sotos's death. At the same time, Lynn noticed that there were still people monitoring Zeril's residence. Using Beander means, Lynn confirmed that the Watchers were members of the Bakarland Party. These gang members were, in turn, being monitored by the Evernight Church's Nighthawks. Obviously, Lynn's anonymous tip had been effective. PFF'd, is this some kind of nesting doll surveillance? Lynn couldn't help but internally joke as he quietly left Zeril's neighborhood. Lynn wasn't too worried about being discovered because he was in a state similar to psychological invisibility. This wasn't something Lynn had learned himself, but he was using a scroll that recorded psychological invisibility. The mystery prior pathway is very adept at making various scrolls, using them as carriers for different Beander abilities, available when needed. So, as a cheating player, Lynn used his Smurf account's boosted state to make numerous bootleg Beander ability scrolls from the Hunter and Spectator pathways for his own use. Yes, here he had to sincerely thank Medici, that annoying younger brother, for his generous contribution, and the Dragon of Nightmares, Alzuhad, for his support. Without them, Lynn wouldn't have had the bootleg abilities needed to make the scrolls. But since they are still watching, it means the matter isn't over, and Ian hasn't been caught yet. After joking to himself, Lynn concluded and specifically went to the East District, where the Bakarland Party members were still looking for Ian. This wasn't surprising since the original work showed that the Bakarland Party never found Ian. And with Rosago, a sequence 5 from the Seer pathway, behind them, it's normal that the Nighthawks, who aren't good at finding people, couldn't find him either. According to the original plot, Klein should get involved in the Helmasuen manuscript because of Ian's commission, get targeted by the Intis ambassador Bakarland, and almost get silenced. Back at his temporary residence, Lynn poured himself a cup of coffee and began reviewing the original plot. And Klein, fearing his identity would be exposed, ultimately had to hire someone to kill the ambassador, then teamed up with Sharon to counterattack and kill the returning Rosago, achieving the 5-pound kill the ambassador feat. But now, because of my interference, Klein hasn't left the Evernight Church. It's hard to say how things will develop next. Thinking of this, Lynn suddenly smirked, took out a brand new notebook from under the coffee table, and spread it open on the table. In his other hand appeared a pristine white quill. Come on, 008, it's your time to shine. Lynn was sure to present Rosago to Klein. Ads by PubFuture. After all, that was the immortal Rosago's iconic moment. Ahem, no, that was the world's true body. Lynn expressed his anticipation for joining the Tarot Club and watching the fool perform a double act. How amusing that would be. Let us reiterate once again, Lynn is a pure fun seeker. For him, nothing is more important than amusement. 008. Damn, you're using a high-ranking spectator pathway sealed artifact for this. If I'd known, I'd rather have been eaten by someone. ... Let me confirm again. Your name is Sherlock Moriarty, your occupation is detective, you're from a county, and you're 22 years old, correct? Yes, that's correct. Lowen Kingdom, Backland, Understreet. Samuel Cathedral. Faced with the colleague who specialized in making fake IDs, Klein, who had reported almost immediately after arriving in Backland to arrange a fake identity, nodded quickly. Seeing him confirm, the Nighthawk responsible for making fake IDs stamped the 2 completed forms and handed one to Klein, saying, your identification should be ready in about 3 days. You can come to pick it up at this time in 3 days. Remember to bring this form. If it's inconvenient, we can also mail it to you. The postage will be reimbursed. I'll come to pick it up myself. Klein shook his head, then sincerely said, thank you. No need to thank me. Everything is for the Evernight Goddess. If you really want to thank someone, it should be those of you fighting on the front lines. The Nighthawk in charge of fake IDs smiled and then looked at the person behind Klein. Next. Leonard quickly stepped forward and began describing his needs to the person. Klein, holding the form, stepped aside and waited, recalling the events of the past 3 days. After receiving the Evernight Goddess's message and being transferred to Backland, despite any doubts and unease, Klein had no choice but to accept reality. While accepting reality, Klein's first problem was naturally how to inform Benson and Melissa. End of chapter. Fortunately, neither his brother nor his sister were the type to dig too deeply into things. So, when Klein found a company that was transferring him to Backland for a better position, Benson and Melissa, though reluctant, understood and were happy for Klein's promotion. After a lavish farewell dinner, Benson and Melissa began planning Klein's travel to Backland, packing a significant amount of luggage for him. If it weren't for the cost of the tickets, they would have accompanied Klein to Backland to help him settle in. Klein was both amused and touched by their care, promising them that once he was settled, he would bring them to live with him in Backland. Melissa needed better education, and Benson could find a better job in Backland. In addition, Mr. Azik visited Klein after receiving his letter, taking his child's skull and leaving behind an Beander item as payment, creeping hunger, a relic of the storm from the Shepherd Pathway. Although Klein had expected a generous reward from Mr. Azik, he was still surprised by receiving creeping hunger. It made him marvel at the world of powerful figures. Especially since the version Mr. Azik gave him was sealed, removing the original side effect of needing to eat a person daily. It now only required feeding after each use. Though still sinister, it was a relief for Klein. Using creeping hunger to devour enemies or those who deserved it meant not harming innocents and eliminating threats to society. Klein also mentioned the Evernight Goddess's message to Mr. Azik. Unfortunately, Mr. Azik was also puzzled but comforted Klein, advising him to stay cautious. After spending 3 more days in Tingen, Klein and Leonard boarded the steam train to Backland just before the deadline. Upon arriving in Backland, they reported to the underground of St. Samuel Cathedral, where a steward briefed them on more mission details. For instance, their target angel was likely from the Mystery Prior Pathway, and they could start by investigating the Moses Ascetic Order. They were to report their progress regularly and not take on other tasks during the mission. The steward then led them to get their false identities. Thankfully, Klein had already planned his cover for the Backland Beander Circle, so the process was smooth. "Why did you choose a detective identity?" Leonard asked Klein in a low voice, bumping his shoulder. "Our main task is to find that angel, which requires a job with enough freedom to inquire in various circles without suspicion. After eliminating unsuitable options, I had to choose between writer, journalist, and detective," Klein explained as he walked out with his luggage. "As a seer, a detective is most fitting because I can use divination to find answers first, then backtrack." "Ah, that makes sense," Leonard nodded in understanding, then added, "I thought about being a poet, but I can't write poems." He seemed genuinely regretful. "That's why you chose Bounty Hunter." Klein glanced at Leonard's form. "What's wrong with Bounty Hunter? It's perfect for blending in with Wild Beyonders. I asked Captain Dunn, and he agreed," Leonard defended. "Plus, I'm about to advance to Sequence 7. Does your choice of Bounty Hunter have anything to do with advancing to Sequence 7? Klein lampooned silently but didn't think Leonard's choice was wrong. Each person's situation was unique. As a seer with limited offensive abilities, Klein had chosen against being a bounty hunter. Leonard, on the other hand, with his combat abilities from the Sleepless Pathway, was well suited for the role. Ads by PubFuture. "So," Klein smiled and said, "in 2 months, I'll probably advance to Sequence 7 too." "What?" Leonard was shocked, staring at Klein. "You just advanced to Sequence 8 half a month ago." "I've already grasped the essence of the clown," Klein calmly replied. Indeed, Klein was confident he could digest the clown potion within 2 months. Having understood the acting method, it wasn't unreasonable to digest a Sequence 8 potion in 2.5 months. He could wait a bit after digestion to avoid attention, but given the Evernight Goddess's possible focus on him, Klein decided to apply for promotion immediately after digestion. "If the church promptly approves my application, it might indicate the goddess's attitude, but I don't think the church has the Seer Pathways Sequence 7 potion formula. I wonder if the cathedral does." Klein murmured internally, unwilling to suspect the Evernight Goddess of ill intent. He had learned much from the Evernight Church since crossing over. Dunn and Old Neil had left him with a favorable impression of the goddess. So, Klein preferred to believe the goddess's attention was without malice. Or maybe I'm just overthinking. Klein smiled wryly, glanced at the still stunned Leonard, and said, I'm off to find a place to stay. See you later. Ah, okay, see you, Leonard responded in a daze. Klein then took his luggage to Minsk Street in the Chorewood district, to a house he had previously scouted. After negotiating with Mrs. Sammer, the landlady, Klein moved his belongings into 15 Minsk Street and began tidying up. As Klein was organizing the balcony of his new home, he suddenly felt a sense of being watched. End of chapter. Is someone watching me? No, that doesn't seem right. It feels more like I'm being observed, rather than surveilled. Is there a wild Beander living nearby? The unknown feeling of being watched caused Klein's movements to pause slightly. He almost instinctively wanted to pinpoint the source of the observation but restrained himself. His mind raced through various possibilities, and he only retained the more plausible ones. While continuing to tidy up, Klein casually moved his position and silently placed his hand next to the pocket containing his deck of cards, ensuring that he could react immediately if anything unexpected happened. However, since he didn't sense any malice from this observation, Klein didn't become overly tense. This sensation of being watched, or rather observed, lasted only a few seconds before it suddenly vanished. Maintaining his expression, Klein continued to tidy up the balcony. Once he finished and returned indoors, confirming that no one outside could see him, Klein finally exhaled and proceeded to perform a divination. The person who was just observing me. After chanting this 3 times, Klein fell into a slumber using the dream divination method. In his dream, Klein saw a young man around 20 years old pacing anxiously in a bedroom across the street. The young man was strikingly handsome, with shoulder-length golden curls and ash-gray eyes. He muttered to himself as he paced. As the turning point that strange person mentioned, referring to the guy across the street. Can he really bring me a breakthrough? Should I continue hiding? But what if they find me? My pathway isn't suited for combat. If I'm discovered, I'm doomed. The dream ended abruptly. Klein opened his eyes, instinctively feeling that the young man looked familiar. After some recollection, he matched the young man to a person he had seen in a newspaper photo. Lynn Sotos. Klein muttered in confusion. Since deciding to become a detective in Backland, he had naturally researched the well-known detectives in the city, and Lynn Sotos was one of them. This detective was famous partly for his precise reasoning, which had helped solve many cases, and partly for his outstanding appearance. In Backland, he was considered an exceptionally handsome man. It was said that many wealthy and noble women commissioned him just to see him. However, despite his fame, this detective had very few scandals and was known for being quite self-disciplined. Klein was unaware of the Helmasuan manuscript incident at this point. Although the Evernight Church was involved, only the Nighthawks handling the matter knew the details and hadn't specifically informed Klein. Why is he here? And why does he seem to be hiding from someone? Klein pondered. Does his turning point involve me? Did someone direct him to come here and find me to solve his troubles? But I only just decided to move here. Klein frowned. Divination, prophecy, or am I being manipulated again? Thinking of the 008 that had orchestrated their Tingen Nighthawks team so precisely, Klein's mood worsened. He immediately reversed 4 steps and ascended to the gray fog to perform another divination. The result surprised him. No manipulation. Klein held the crystal pendulum, deep in thought. After a few seconds, he put down the crystal pendulum and conducted another divination. Will Lynn Soto's situation bring me danger? The crystal pendulum deviated slightly but not much. This indicated that while Lynn Soto's situation could bring Klein danger, it wasn't significant. This relieved Klein, and he began to think more clearly. Given the current situation, Lynn Soto seems to be fleeing from someone. Someone guided him, telling him that his turning point is me, or rather, the new tenant in this area. Regardless of who Lynn Soto's has offended, that strange person who guided him. Klein suddenly recalled a certain enigmatic, transmigrator figure. Could it be him? Ads by PubFuture. Though this connection seemed illogical, Klein couldn't think of anyone else who would do such a thing besides that angel from his world. Moreover, since this angel had specifically mentioned coming to Backland to find him, it wouldn't be surprising for him to give some hints once Klein arrived. Klein was no longer concerned about whether the angel had been watching him. After all, he couldn't resist these powerful figures anyway. With this in mind, Klein performed another divination on this matter. Though he didn't expect much from the result and was prepared for failure, he was surprised when the divination yielded results. So, it really is related to Angel Fellow. Klein felt a complex mix of emotions. He calmed his thoughts and jokingly muttered, "It feels like he wants me to help him." But since this matter is indeed related to him, Klein pondered, his fingers unconsciously tapping the bronze table, making tock, tock, tock sounds. Why, is there something special about Lynn Soto's? Or is it the situation he's involved in that holds significant secrets? Or perhaps there's something in this situation that Angel cares about. Klein didn't think that the angel would guide Lynn Soto's to him out of boredom. There must be a reason and deeper meaning behind it. But with the limited information he had, Klein couldn't come to a definite conclusion. Sighing, Klein decided to report this matter to the church and see what they knew or what their stance was. At 16 Minsk Street, across from Klein's current residence, Lynn, with his strong dramatic spirit, continued pacing the room, playing the role of a competent detective who had been drawn into a major espionage case, narrowly escaping death. He had some skills but mainly relied on mystical cheating, and now saw a turning point but was unsure. After a period of repetitive acting, Lynn finally stopped and sat down, appearing to be in deep thought, though still looking somewhat distressed. If it weren't for the feather pen lying quietly in the drawer, it would be hard to believe that he was orchestrating all this himself. End of chapter. It's surprising that they chose 15 Minsk Street. I thought I'd have to take the initiative to get involved. Is this what they call plot inertia? During the second epic, since the main body's role required a semi-automated state, Lynn switched his main consciousness to his first Smurf account after completing the most crucial parts of the performance, holding a quill with a raised eyebrow. Maybe the Sephiroth itself is at work. Worried about Klein discovering the anomaly by using the Sephiroth as a hack, Lynn didn't directly use 008 to set up the encounter. He only intended to use 008 to write scripts involving Ian, Rosago, and others, renting 16 Minsk Street out of mischief, waiting to bump into Klein. Lynn's original plan was to wait until Klein came to Backland, ensure Ian involved Klein in the Helmasuan manuscript incident as in the original, then find a chance to meet Klein, building a natural connection. Unexpectedly, without any guidance, Klein still chose to rent 15 Minsk Street, using the same Sherlock Moriarty private detective disguise as in the original. This led Lynn to happily abandon the original plan after 3 seconds of hesitation, opting for a more interesting script. For example, manually making Klein discover the abnormal detective Lynn Soto's next door, deliberately portraying himself as having a connection with the angel disguise to catch Klein's attention. Based on Klein's habits, he would likely report my situation to the church. Given the church's current attitude towards my angel disguise, they'd probably choose to have Klein contact me to try reaching the angel behind me. I might even gain some benefits from them. Lynn twirled the quill pen, relaxed. He knew this carried a risk of being exposed, but just as no one would think Mr. Fool and Gehrman were the same person, the risk was low. Compared to this low risk, a seemingly ordinary Sequence 9 with an angel disguise was more beneficial for Lynn's future actions and could explain some of his later anomalies in front of Klein. Lynn was aware he couldn't completely hide his anomalies from Klein, so he decided to openly show some things to cover up larger anomalies. As for the Evernight goddess, Lynn wasn't too worried. She wasn't the type to kill fellow transmigrators. Instead, because the apocalypse was approaching, the Evernight goddess would likely maximize the combat power on her side. So, Lynn wasn't afraid of the Evernight church ganging up on his main body. If worse came to worst, he'd switch accounts. Just as Lynn thought this, he caught a glimpse of a figure passing by the window. Lynn's actions paused because the person passing by his window was his new guardian, Saucereer. Strange, why did Saucereer come over so early today? Was he done with his work? Or did he bring new ancient texts for me? Lynn was puzzled. Apart from preparing to bump into Klein, he had also been doing serious work these days. Most of his time was spent reading books on various occult knowledge. After all, knowledge is power for a mystery prior. The more he knows, the stronger he becomes. Saussure had been busy settling the recent batch of humans and managing the daily affairs of the ancient sun god's forces. Except for regular visits to check on Lynn, he was almost in a state of divine seclusion. Saussure was incredibly busy. From Lynn's observation, about 80% of the matters requiring high-level handling in the ancient sun god's forces were managed by Saussure alone, keeping the entire divine kingdom running, which made Lynn, a laid-back player, weep. Knock, knock, ads by PubFuture. As Lynn guessed wildly, the knock on the door finally came. The door is unlocked. Come in, Lynn called out, watching as the door opened and Saussure walked in. Saussure was clearly exhausted. This fatigue wasn't physical. An angel king like Saussure didn't need much rest, but mental fatigue. Saussure's spirit was clearly nearing its limit due to continuous work. Saussure, you look like you're about to die from overwork. Don't you ever take a break? Lynn sized up Saussure, unable to resist saying, overtime isn't supposed to be like this. Haven't you slept in years? It's fine. Actually, I've been given a 3-day break, Saussure responded, shaking his head to show he was fine, and smiled warmly at Lynn. Only 3 days and you're satisfied? This won't do, Saussure. You should fight for a year off, Lynn argued, genuinely concerned for his guardian but also enjoying the drama. Saussure shook his head helplessly, looking at Lynn. The divine kingdom can't run without me. There are too many things to handle. Neither Ouroboros, Aucuses, nor Anquelt are good at dealing with these matters. Maybe one day I'll have a year off, but not now. However, Saussure suddenly smiled. If you are willing to help, I'd welcome it. His tone was half joking, half serious. Saussure genuinely welcomed Lynn's help with administrative work. Despite being a tool, Saussure got tired, and a mystery prior like Lynn was well suited for such work. With some training, he could take on the role. Hearing this, Lynn blinked and pretended not to hear. Huh, Saussure, did you say something? I think I just went deaf. Seeing Lynn's feigned ignorance, Saussure was both helpless and unsurprised. He didn't continue the topic, instead saying, actually, after this break, I need to visit the demonic wolves, which will take some time. While I'm away, I'll ask Aucuses to take care of you. Goodness, a trip right after a break. Is this still 24/7 work shift? But, demonic wolves. Lynn raised an eyebrow, feeling he had caught a key piece of information. End of chapter. Wait, catching the crucial information, Lynn couldn't help but interrupt Saussure, asking, you're going to the land of the demonic wolf? Yes, there are some very important matters that need my personal attention, Saussure explained briefly. What about Medici? Lynn asked, his mind quickly recalling the original story's details about the demonic wolf tribe from the second epic. If he remembered correctly, the Evernight goddess hadn't yet achieved her goal concerning the entire demonic wolf family, right? Medici will be going with me. Saussure evidently had no intention of hiding this. I want to go too. Lynn immediately responded without a second of hesitation. After a pause, he added, I know you're going there on official business, and I'm at least a sequence too, which means I can be of help. Saussure's smile seemed a bit resigned, as if he had a headache. He then looked at Lynn for a moment but did not refuse. All right, we'll be departing in 3 days. Be ready by then. Got it. Lynn made an okay gesture, and after watching Saussure leave, his main body, which was in a semi-idle state in the 5th epic, suddenly regained its sharpness and thoughtful expression. This timing to go to the land of the demonic wolf, interesting. In the 2nd epic, within the realm where the demonic wolf tribe resided. Amonizes, you're stargazing again. Antigonus, a rare sight among the subsidiary gods, curiously asked the goddess. If it were anyone else, Antigonus wouldn't have bothered to ask. After all, he didn't particularly like the other gods. But, goddess of misfortune, Amonizes was different. Although this goddess often lacked presence, her temperament and appearance made Antigonus not dislike her. Although he hadn't seen her many times, Antigonus's few memories of Amonizes seemed always to include this female goddess stargazing. Yes, because the stars tonight are beautiful. Ammonizes smiled in response, then shifted her gaze to Antigonus, saying, Lord Antigonus, is there something you need? Although Ammonizes was herself a Sequence 1 Misfortune Knight and theoretically ranked higher than Antigonus, he was still the son of the destruction demonic wolf, Phlegre, so she maintained the proper courtesy and gentle demeanor. No, Antigonus shook his head. He didn't actually have anything pressing. He had merely spoken out of a rare sighting of Ammonizes. If there's nothing else, Lord Antigonus, I'll take my leave. There are still matters I need to attend to, Ammonizes said with a polite and humble smile that was impeccable. Antigonus watched her leave, then similarly glanced up at the starry sky, muttering to himself after a while, what's so interesting about the stars? In the fifth epic, Lowen Kingdom, Backland, beneath Street Samuel's Cathedral. So, Mr. Sotos has indeed had contact with that angel. After hearing Klein's report, Crestet Sesimir showed a contemplative expression. That's right, Sword of the Goddess. Crestet Sesimir was the direct superior of Klein and Leonard after they were transferred to Backland. Anything concerning Mr. Sotos could be reported directly to Mr. Sesimir. This was not surprising. Matters involving an angel were never trivial, especially under the direct orders of the Evernight goddess herself. Naturally, the church took the task of finding Lynn Sotos very seriously. And tasks involving high sequence matters were generally executed by the Red Gloves. Therefore, it was only natural for Crestet Sesimir, one of the Red Gloves' leaders, to be in charge. This was also why Crestet Sesimir was the one who went to Tingen to deliver the goddess's message. Incidentally, because of this high-sequence secret mission, Klein and Leonard had been transferred to the Red Gloves department as reserves. Once they reached Sequence 7, they would officially join the Red Gloves. Yes, Lord Sesimir, does the church have any information on Mr. Sotos? Klein nodded, then asked. The church indeed has information on Mr. Sotos. In fact, he is one of our informants within the Moses Ascetic Order. Adds by PubFuture. Crestet Sesimir didn't intend to withhold such information. As one of the Red Gloves leaders, he naturally knew their informants. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't casually share this information with Klein, but special circumstances called for special measures. An informant. So Mr. Sotos is actually an informant for the church within the Moses Ascetic Order. No wonder he said his pathway isn't very combat-oriented. The Mystery Prior Pathways Sequence 9 is indeed more support-oriented. Right, the Angel Fellow also seems to be of the Mystery Prior Pathway. Could it be that they're truly from the Moses Ascetic Order, or is it that they're paying attention to Mr. Sotos because he's part of the Moses Ascetic Order? Klein's mind raced. He felt as though he was close to the truth, but something was missing. And that Angel Fellow is likely of the Mystery Prior Pathway, which gives them a reason to pay attention to Mr. Sotos. Crestet Sesimir evidently thought along the same lines as Klein but with more information, but as far as we know, the Moses Ascetic Order doesn't have such an angel. Although it's possible the Moses Ascetic Order is deliberately hiding this, it currently seems more likely that the angel is an adversary of the Moses Ascetic Order. Crestet Sesimir's tone was confident, knowing some secrets about angelic levels as a high-ranking member of the Evernight Church. Though it's difficult to ascertain the exact reason they contacted Mr. Sotos, since the angel allowed Mr. Sotos to contact you, you might as well try to approach him. This could be your chance to meet the angel. Crestet Sesimir continued. Mr. Sesimir is very certain that the Angel Fellow and the Moses Ascetic Order are adversaries. Why? Is there some hidden knowledge I'm not aware of? Klein glanced at Crestet Sesimir. Although he still had some doubts, he did not reject the suggestion and nodded, saying, I will try to contact him. But regarding the assassination attempts on Mr. Sotos, does the church have any leads? That's a complicated matter. Crestet Sesimir's expression became slightly awkward for a moment. He then turned to his bookshelf, rummaging through it for a while before finally taking out an unsealed file and handing it to Klein while saying, most likely, those currently hunting Lynn Sotos are spies from Intis. End of chapter. While the Tirani von Helmasuen's manuscript incident wasn't directly Klein's responsibility, Crestet Sesimir naturally paid attention to such a major espionage case involving two countries and important information. Espionage. Klein was taken aback. He had considered that Lynn Sotos might be hunted by wild beyonders or might have offended some secretive organization, but he never imagined that the other party would be involved in a major espionage case. Could this case also be related to the Angel Fellow? What exactly does he want to do? Klein became more puzzled. He then took the file handed to him by Krestet Sesimir and quickly read through it. The file itself was nothing special, mainly recording information related to Lynn Sotos, including some of his achievements as an informant, until the final part of the file explained how Lynn Sotos was almost killed due to the matters with the Intis spies. Along with the file was the report Lynn had written about the incident. In fact, the church has also been searching for Mr. Sotos' whereabouts, hoping to provide him with shelter, but they haven't found him. Krestet Sesimir spoke with a hint of helplessness. I didn't expect him to have contact with His Highness. Krestet Sesimir then looked at Klein and continued, regarding those Intis spies, you don't need to worry too much. The church has been following up on this matter, and it won't be long before they are dealt with. There shouldn't be any high-ranking beyonders going after Mr. Sotos, at most just low-ranking ones. If you have any needs, you can always apply for assistance from the church. Don't worry, the church will always be your backup. I will. Klein nodded solemnly. At the same time, inside the Intis embassy located in the West District of Backland, Ambassador Bakarland listened with a gloomy expression to the report from his subordinate. So, that damn detective still hasn't been found. Bakarland's expression was displeased, clearly dissatisfied with this outcome. Initially, Bakarland simply had the person who knew too much silenced, without paying much attention to him. However, with the subsequent disappearance of the people sent to silence him, and the sudden intervention of the Nighthawks, Bakarland's hatred towards Lynn Sotos had reached its peak. Although there was no direct evidence, Bakarland was certain that it was that damn detective who had reported their affairs to the Nighthawks. It was precisely because of the Nighthawks' intervention that Bakarland suddenly found himself at a loss, and many of his actions had to become more cautious, resulting in a lot of unnecessary trouble. How could Bakarland not be filled with hatred towards Lynn Sotos? More personnel have been dispatched over there. Most of our people are searching for Ian, and Lynn Sotos is a very cunning detective. The subordinate clearly tried to make himself sound less incompetent. Bakarland, however, was clearly not interested in listening to his nonsense. He asked directly, has Ian been found? Not yet. The subordinate immediately hung his head low. Ads by PubFuture. Worthless. Bakarland couldn't help but curse, kicking his subordinate before saying, continue searching. 16 Minsk Street. Lynn sat at the desk, humming a little tune as he held the quill in his hand, writing in his notebook. Bakarland's hatred towards Lynn Sotos reached its peak because of the Nighthawks' intervention, vowing to silence this detestable detective. Ian, while evading the pursuit of the Bakarland party, decided to investigate the current situation of the detective Zeril. But because other detectives were deceived by the imposter Zeril, Ian had no choice but to rely on luck to find some newly emerging detectives. In this process, he unexpectedly discovered Lynn Sotos, who had been missing for several days. After writing the last paragraph, Lynn put down the quill in his hand and stretched lazily. He glanced through the window at the dark house opposite, confirming that Klein had not yet returned. Lynn then casually drew the curtains, preparing to let his main account rest while switching his focus to his Smurf account. So, it's time to go to the land of the demonic wolf. Do you want to know why we're going to the land of the demonic wolf this time? Lynn asked with a mysterious expression, looking at Medici, who was also waiting. Medici, who was originally resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and glanced at Lynn with suspicion. If it were in the future, he would have definitely ignored Lynn. However, at this moment, Medici, who had only been born a few months ago and had been brought to the side of the ancient sun god early because of Lynn, still didn't understand the sinister nature of people. So, after thinking for a few seconds, following the principle of listening without losing anything, Medici still leaned over. End of chapter. Our goal is. Lynn whispered to Medici's ear, then suddenly reached out and tousled Medici's hair, completely ruining the sophisticated hairstyle Medici had. Not only that, after messing up Medici's hair, Lynn looked at Medici with satisfaction and said, "Now you look like a kid. What's the point of pretending to be an adult when you're just a few months old? If you don't experience childhood properly now and instead learn to be a wage slave like Saussure, you'll regret it later." Medici was about to get angry, but before he could react, Lynn's words left him stunned, his anger dissipating. Lynn then put his arm around Medici's shoulder and said earnestly, "Little Red, it's good that you're ambitious, but ambition needs to be directed properly. Being a wage slave has no future, so don't follow Saussure's example. Otherwise, you'll regret it later. If you really want to improve, we can learn from Leodoro. Fight during wars and enjoy leisurely life with a drink when there's no war. It's not only conducive to promotion but also enjoyable. Isn't that great?" Medici paused, not quite understanding what being a wage slave meant at such a young age. But he could clearly see the vast difference in lifestyle between Saussure and Leodoro. As for which one he preferred, Medici, who had never thought about such a question before, looked pensive. Meanwhile, Lynn nodded in satisfaction. He believed that even if Medici's mindset couldn't change immediately, with continuous influence, Medici would eventually become a happy idler like him. This way, Medici wouldn't blindly follow ancient sun god and end up like how he did in the original story. Lynn's eyes darkened momentarily as he remembered Medici's fate in the original story, but then he quickly returned to his usual cheerful self. Cough. Just then, a cough interrupted them. Without changing his expression, Lynn turned around to see Saussure walking in from the door, apparently having listened for quite some time. In a normal situation, one would feel embarrassed and flustered, but not Lynn. He even cheerfully waved at Saussure and asked, "Saussure, good morning. How was your rest?" His tone carried a hint of concern. This concern was genuine. Although Lynn didn't feel particularly close to the Dark Angel Saussure, due to Medici's fate in the original story, he didn't harbor any resentment towards Saussure either. Their relationship was more of a mutually wary and utilitarian one. Lynn wanted to stabilize humanity by leveraging Saussure's power to seek promotion. On the other hand, ancient sun god, having encountered Lynn's original form to some extent, brought Lynn back for his own purposes. Perhaps this relationship would improve in the future, but at least not now. However, Lynn genuinely liked Saussure, who had taken care of him and Medici despite his limited interactions. Even though he knew Saussure's care was due to the orders of the ancient sun god, what did it matter? As long as Saussure's care was genuine, Lynn didn't care about the reason behind it. "Thanks for asking. I rested quite well." Saussure was taken aback by Lynn's shamelessness and the unexpected concern. Alongside his increasingly complex feelings as someone used to being treated as a tool, he seriously said, "What about you two? Are you ready to go? Let me emphasize once again, this journey will be tough. Our relationship with the subsidiary gods are not friendly, and this time, our trip to land of the demonic wolves is a secret infiltration. There's a high possibility that we'll be involved in a battle related to the ancient gods. Although you won't need to intervene, if any accidents happen, even I can't guarantee your safety. Who do you think you're looking down on? I'm not the fragile human children you usually handle. I'm well aware of how dangerous this world is." Medici retorted, recalling something and sneered, "It's because I know how dangerous this world is that I don't want to keep living under your protection." Of course, Medici could always choose to hide in the divine kingdom, but what good would that do? Medici knew that without experiencing battles and stepping out into the world, he could never become a true weather warlock, let alone advance to a higher existence. And by remaining weak, when he encountered the next nightmare dragon, he might not have a brother by his side. "I don't care about the danger." Lynn glanced at Medici, not surprised by his thoughts. As for his own attitude towards Saussure's words, he honestly said, "I just want to pet a big dog." Ads by PubFuture. Yes, Lynn really wanted to mess with the Evernight goddess. Mainly, he wanted to mess with her dog head. That would be so memorable. What, Lynn, are you talking nonsense again? Did reading books for a few days break your brain? Medici, whose emotions had just settled, was almost choked again, incredulously looking at Lynn. Although he couldn't believe it, he instinctively couldn't help but be sarcastic, making his words as irritating as possible. Petting a big dog. Sorcerer also froze, looking at Lynn in disbelief, seemingly unable to understand Lynn's thoughts. Are all kids these days so hard to understand? Sorcerer tried to recall the children he had encountered before, but in the end, he realized that the one who was hard to understand was not the children but Lynn Soto's. Just kidding. Seeing that no one believed the truth, Lynn sighed at the degeneration of the world's morals while waving his hand and said, I just want to see those demonic wolves. If possible, I'd like to get some of their blood to analyze the information on darkness pathway and the roots of divination. This reason sounded much more reasonable. After all, analyzing information about mythical creatures was indeed a necessity for a sage. I can't promise other methods, but I should be able to get you a drop of blood from the darkness pathway. Sorcerer breathed a sigh of relief and seemed to remember something as he said. Lynn blinked, feeling even more excited. Without hesitation, he said, please make sure I meet the provider of the blood in person. I want to thank them in person. Sure, you'll meet sooner or later anyway. Sorcerer apparently didn't think much and nodded. Then, he took out something similar to a pocket watch from his pocket, glanced at it, and said, let's go. We're leaving. End of chapter. Ads by PubFuture.